Let's hear it. All right. So my name is Wendy Jones. I'm the Executive Director of MARCO, the Minnesota Alliance of Recovery Community Organizations. I'm a person in long-term recovery from substance use disorder from sometime in the past century. I don't give a date anymore. It's been a while. We're so happy to have this event, which I have to admit has evolved. We started planning this back in, November with me, I think. And then we were all set to go in January, and we announced that we were going to have a town hall. And we announced that we invited our elected officials, one of whom's here today, Representative Luke Frederick. Thank you for being here. And then that very same day that we were trying to line people up, Governor Walz announced he was resigning. ICE killed Renee Good. And the world just blew up. So it was hard to get attention around this, but it's a really important topic and issue. And so given the past few months, we decided we would have more of an educational conversation around this, Pride for Peers, and supporting people with lived experience with substance use disorder who are also members of the queer community. And what prompted this initially was the closing of Pride's residential program, which was a huge blow for culturally specific recovery support services. And that's something that MARCO advocates for. We advocate for grassroots recovery movements, recovery community organizations, peer recovery support services, and meeting people where they are. And knowing that everyone's recovery is different. And who we are, who we were born as, who we grew up as, where we grew up, how we grew up, how we've lived our lives, that has a huge impact, not only on how we may have developed a substance use disorder, but how we recover. And too often, culturally specific and culturally responsive recovery support services are not supported, acknowledged, and advanced the way that they need to be for long-term recovery to happen in our communities. So I want to introduce first MARCO's Community Relations Manager, Whitney Nelson, who was the one who kind of stirred the pot and said, we got to do this. So Whitney Nelson, come on up. And I will make a note that we're here live, but this is a hybrid event. So we do also have people joining us via Zoom. So there's a large crowd, both analog and digital. So Whitney, say a few words.
I'm going to keep it kind of short. Ooh, dropping the mic already. No, thank you everyone who's here. And thank you, Wendy, for that introduction. What ultimately led me to my role at MARCO was doing queer recovery advocacy work, grassroots work, boots on the ground work. And I feel very honored. It's going to make me tear up in a way. James and Nick from Aliveness a couple years ago, God, wow, we're getting old. Hosted a substance-free event for Pride, and it was awesome. And was a patio party with a DJ, and we had about 75 to 100 people show up to celebrate Pride and celebrate Pride substance-free. And that really kicked off, an example and a model of what that can look like. And just thank you all for being here. Without further ado, I want to introduce Sam Vitaello. Did I do it? Yeah, we'll work on it. To moderate tonight's panel. But these are some of the OGs in the space. And just having an honest and earnest conversation about the work you do and who you are is enough. So I know that y'all will take it from here. So thank you.
All right. Thank you all for being here. My name is Sam Vitiello. I use he, they pronouns. I'm the treatment director for Wilder Recovery, which is a program that specializes serving immigrants and refugees. We have an amazing peer recovery program. We have mental health, case management, substance use, psychiatry, the whole gamut. But I'm just here because I'm passionate about the community, and I'm just get to ask some lovely people some questions, and they get to share their expertise. So can I have the panel come up, please?
Woo!
I also last minute changed the questions. Whitney sent me out a detailed question and I changed them. So be patient with the panel because, you know. Actually, before we get started, this lovely human wanted to make an announcement, so please make your announcement.
Hi, this is a little unrelated, but thank you for giving me a few minutes to talk about it. I'm from HCMC's Research Institute, and we are recruiting for a research study on how age and inflammation, specifically caused by HIV, impacts on how well vaccines work. Essentially, as you get older, your immune system stops working as well, and if you have HIV, even on antiretroviral therapy, your immune system is still suppressed and doesn't work as well. And so we want to understand if these two factors together are affecting how long vaccines are protecting people. And so we're recruiting very widely right now because we are recruiting people living with HIV, people who are HIV negative, as well as anyone who's over 18. So if anyone's interested or anyone knows anyone who would be interested, I have some flyers that I can hand out, and there's a number at the bottom to call. And we also want to make sure that the study doesn't take valuable time from people that they can't give. So we do compensate each visit that you attend, you receive $40 cash. But yeah, if you have any interest or anyone has any questions or anything, I'll be back there and you can come ask me or take a flyer. Thank you so much.
And I want to preface that we all have our own experiences. We all have different views of how substance use should be treated, or even as a queer human, what my experience is very different than other queer humans. And so I always like to say, just because someone might give a resource or someone might say, hey, here's a really cool intervention that worked, that doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody, and nor are we saying this is the way. It's just, here are some things that have been beneficial. Here are some resources that folks that I've worked with have said are fantastic. So my goal is to not offend anybody. It's just about saying, like, here's some of the things that we have, some education, and understand that that's not going to work for everybody. We all have different stories. We all have different experiences. And so I want to acknowledge that. With that being said, this is a panel of serving the LGBTQIA two spirited plus. For the sake of this panel, I am going to use the word queer. I do understand that if there are older folks in the crowd, that could be an offensive word, and please tell me if that's too much. I won't use that word, but that is the word that I identify, and just because the queer community reclaimed it doesn't mean that it's reclaimed for everybody. So I want to acknowledge that too. Again, I don't want to offend anybody. That's easier to say, to be honest. So for the panelists, don't feel obligated to answer every question. I will give the opportunity for all of you to answer, but you're not forced to answer every single question except for the first one. I would love for everybody to introduce themselves and tell me a little bit about your organization and maybe why you're here.
Hi, I'm Clementine Fry. I work with the Twin Cities Wellness Center and Recovery Gym. We're located in North Minneapolis. We're call ourselves Fitness Integrated Treatment. So it's 2.1 IOP treatment for chemical dependency and substance use. But we also have a fitness and nutrition component. And yeah.
Hi, I'm RJ Holmes Leopold. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm the Federal Club co-chair here in Minnesota for the Human Rights Campaign. So the Human Rights Campaign is the nation's largest LGBTQ plus advocacy organization. We just announced this morning we have over 4 million members throughout the country. So excited to continue the work that HRC has been doing for multiple decades to support education and advocacy and workforce and policy that is helping to create a more equal environment for our LGBTQ plus community.
Hello everyone, my name is Kyla Levine and I am the case manager at the Aliveness Project, one of several reps we have here tonight. I run a program called Hotels to Housing, which is a shelter program for trans feminine folks that are experiencing housing instability.
I'm James McMurray. I'm the Associate Executive Director at the Aliveness Project. I will say before that, I heard someone mention, it was you mentioning Pride Institute from 2017 to December when we closed. I was there as a mental health therapist. I still do some work throughout the community for BIPOC, also for anybody that needs services. Met Whitney through a program SAFE, also. Me and one of my counterparts are still doing an organization called SAFE. It's support available for everyone. So we do that on the side and I try to stay busy. So that's my thing.
Thanks, James. I'm Nick. I use he, him, his pronouns. I manage one of our housing programs at the Aliveness Project. I'm also an intern with the Center for Victims of Torture in their Evaluation and Research Department, and I'm a Master's of Public Health candidate at the University of Minnesota right now, entering my 3rd year. But before that, I'm a person with lived experience. I am living with substance use disorder. I bring that into my practice. I work with my staff to understand how to use that in a way for folks who are, we practice harm reduction and housing first, which are kind of sometimes competing ideologies with the sobriety community, but we try to integrate them in a way that makes sense and in a way that complement each other because both are, valid. So that's me.
Good variety of folks up here. I like it. All right. What does affirming recovery support look like? How can peers, organizations, and even community members cultivate a queer affirming environment?
Okay, I'll go first. So I would say affirming recovery support, I can talk about from I go to meetings because I'm a person who is practicing. So I go to Narcotics Anonymous meetings, and I was in a meeting with a bunch of straight, cis white men who identify as gay. And one little change that we made to be more affirming, because we had one woman who would show up, one queer woman, and then we were noticing that this other folks were not returning, trans folks were not returning, and women were not staying. And so we were like, well, let's introduce ourselves with our pronouns. And everybody's like, well, I'm an addict. I don't care about my pronouns. And I'm like, no, you need to also do the pronouns. And so that's one little way. I know it's the very smallest way, but when everybody uses their pronouns, it doesn't make other folks feel like they're putting themselves out there when they use their pronouns. And that's one way that a community group that I'm a part of now has tried to make a difference and change. I don't know who else wants to speak next.
I will say zero tolerance when it comes to stigma or having to deal with misgendering. It's just a space where people can be themselves and not have to educate the room. Sometimes we just feel more comfortable with our own.
Those are both really good answers. I'm not sure if I can build on that, but I will say that when I was active in my use, all of my queer community was centered around that use. And so in recovery, I really had to find my people so I could still have that queer community in recovery. And that doesn't always mean the first queer space that you go to is going to be your people. Sometimes you have to explore, but ultimately finding a place where people recognize your face and are going to check in with you if you don't show up, I think is very important.
think it's important to be intentional when you're doing programming. It's a lot of what we do with HRC Minnesota and thinking about the events that we do and just being cognizant that there are stereotypes about what events are for the LGBT community and what events HRC is normally associated with. And we all have that history and that baggage. And I think it's important for us to challenge some of the stereotypes that are associated with that and some of the spaces that we go to. It's something that our student community has actually talked a lot about this spring, is that there is still perception that everything that is around the queer community tends to involve the bars. And so it's important for us to think about that's not the only place people gather. And it should not be the only place that we think we should all do our programming. And so we have to think intentionally about where are the intersections of our identity and how does that influence the places that we gather and what allows us to present ourselves in as authentic manner as possible that's supportive of who we are in that moment in time. And as we think about the spaces that we're going to do events, we have to think about, yes, there is a segment of our community that is naturally going to gravitate to some historic places. But that doesn't mean that that's the only places we should go, that we have to think creatively about other places that might be more hospitable or more welcoming if you're thinking about use of alcohol and substances. It's about thinking about spaces where people from different income backgrounds are going to feel welcome coming into, as well as people across racial ethnic groups and how they present their gender identities. And if they have a family and that's important to them. So it's really about having that conversation, I think, intentionally when you're programming, that you are thinking about spaces that are really inclusive across the board. You're not going to get it right every single time, but you have to have that conversation and you have to be willing to embrace that and understand the dynamic when you're thinking about spaces and creating spaces. And hopefully, as you look at the bigger picture, you are creating more options for people.
My first position that I got in the field was at the Pride Institute at the residential location, and then I had the opportunity to work in the outpatient location, and then was part-time employed there when the closure happened. But working for them, I think I got spoiled in a few different ways. Spoiled, obviously, in getting to work for a company that recognized me as a person, period, and then also affirmed me in that way. But I also got spoiled in that I got a lesson in that a space can be designated as affirming for someone and not be sometimes, And so that was a hard and great lesson that I got to learn, that, true affirming care talks the talk and walks the walk. And there can be sometimes a lip service that happens in the community, and especially in care for folks, where they say, we're going to be inclusive, we're going to be affirming, but really what they're doing is maybe creating more areas in which someone can feel exposed or feel like they're not really getting their needs met, or that they have to ask for additional things to get their needs met, which is really just more bandwidth spent. So I think affirming care, being curious, finding out what the need is, and then really going for it, following through on that.
Yeah, I really like what you had to say. I also, I lost my train of thought. If it comes back to me, I'll jump in.
I love what you have to say. Just because you have a rainbow when you're walking in to a facility doesn't mean you're going to provide gender affirming care and saying, are you walking the walk, and being able to provide care for folks. What are barriers that folks from the queer community experience? And I know that folks in general are experiencing a lot of barriers, but I want to kind of emphasize what are some of the other things, and some that all folks are experiencing, but we're thinking about it.
It started kind of builds on what you were just mentioning, Sam, about just because there's a rainbow doesn't mean it's all that, right? I think there's the presumption just because you put a rainbow on something or you say you're affirming and inclusive, that intention actually has the same impact. And I think it's important to have to recognize that intent and impact aren't always one and the same. Having the queer flag out there, being able to say you're affirming and inclusive, doesn't mean that you have all of a sudden got rid of the baggage that you're walking in with and other people in your space are walking in with, intentionally or unintentionally. And so I think it's important to recognize that while we may be well-intentioned to say, yes, we're all welcoming, we're all family, we're gonna step in our own poop. And we have to be okay with that. And we have to be able to acknowledge that when we step in it, we step in it and understand the impact is there. While our intention may not have been that, that is the impact and that's very real. And I think across the different intersections of identity around queer issues and other aspects of our identity, we tend to minimize the most common denominator because it's convenient. Like, we're all queer. Okay, but that's not the only part of who I am and who I present, and that might not be the most central part of who I am in this moment. And so we have to be able to create spaces that allow for that to exist. And we, as a barrier, because we're part of a community that has been historically marginalized and traditionally excluded, that it's easy to say, well, we're all queer, we're all the same. Well, that's only one part of who we are. And creating that mentality and just saying that we're all queer, yay, is the barrier. And unless we're recognizing that there are other aspects of our identity that contribute to our conversation, contribute to the spaces that we're creating, contribute to our interactions, then our intentions are not really going to make the impact we're hoping to have.
Beautiful point. Thank you for jogging my memory. I think that inclusive places are often seen as frictionless places, but I think that, to your point, is such a huge problem. There should be space for friction, difference in ideas, experience, background in a truly inclusive space, and people should feel safe enough to vocalize when that is maybe not being honored. I think it's really important to just be intentional with the space that you're creating. Be open to those conversations and be willing to experience a little friction. I think that one of the huge barriers that queer people face is just finding care that speaks to their experience when entering the recovery community, when deciding to make a change for yourself. Oftentimes you can end up in a center with people that don't really have similar experiences. And I think that can be a huge turnoff. I know that some of the first recovery spaces I went to were very old, white, cishet, and just not it. And it wasn't until I explored a little bit more and I realized, okay, there is going to be recovery spaces that are more familiar to me.
Thinking about barriers that folks in the queer community experience, we experience like lack of acceptance, rejection. The list could go on and on, but I also firsthand think about family and friends. You know, being a Black queer kid and the oldest of 8, my dad did not want a gay son, or I never lived up to those expectations that my family had. So I got that rejection from the family. Also going and growing up and choosing my queer family, I still felt it there as well. Because you're trying to find out where do you fit in. And sometimes you don't fit in. It goes back to what you said earlier. You know, I do live in Minnesota. I'm a person of color. You know, there's not always that, I don't always feel accepted in some of the spaces, but I still find myself, I make it work. And I also find a way of making it feel familiar, that I'm comfortable with it, but at the same time, it's not fair, it's not right. So I think, you know, people deal with those different barriers on a daily basis. And we all try to come together, and you also do walk in the door and we see a flag or equal rights or someone that looks like us. I'm like, ooh, I'm in my right space. And you can be in that space and still feel isolated and alone, because nobody comes out to, you know, I'm a hummingbird, but if I don't go to you, people don't typically come to me. So I sort of go to you and make you like me. And it makes me feel, it just gives me my own sense of the worthiness that I was supposed to be in that space without me thinking and feeling like I don't belong there.
Thank you for saying family systems. It made me think of other systems. I get to experience walking through life with so many people through my job in case management, and so many systems are. I feel like the healthcare system, we are trying. There are parts of the healthcare system that are trying to address queer identity and make space for queer people, but there are so many other systems that just neglect to do that. The justice system neglects to do that, and so many folks that I have worked with will experience the justice system, and they will just face barriers throughout that time that they're there. Other systems like the housing system is not set up. There's little like a policy that may have like an inclusive word in it, but it's not like at the forefront. We're not greeted with our identity in most spaces. We are not greeted as we are. And I think that is the hardest piece to overcome as we're in, when we're in our own spaces, we can greet each other in that way. But when we're out into the rest of the world, I mean, corporate America, I don't think like maybe they have some, I know my partner works in corporate America and they have like a pride group, but it's not, I don't know, he doesn't really think it's that great. So I think like people are making attempts, but is it actually seeing us for who we are? Is it actually seeing us where we're at? And for systems that are maybe a little scarier, like is it actually guiding us through in an affirming way? Got anything coming, time?
Going off of Kyla's response, there is so much, I think, privilege lost in whether it's a medical relationship or a business relationship, where I don't know. I can speak from my experience. I don't know how often I feel that I have the ability to engage with friction in ways that would be sustainable and visible. Like I think oftentimes myself and other queer people, we have to rely on others to advocate for us. We have to find the right moment to advocate for ourselves so as not to be too visible. I think at least the period of time when I initially transitioned, it was, everything was about kind of trying to pass. It's, I think, a little bit hopefully better now in some ways. It's also kind of terrible in other ways, but being allowed to have those friction moments with professionals in care fields. I've had moments with doctors where, my response is something's wrong, and their response is not, especially as a queer person in recovery, is that's not really going on, or you're not really feeling that, and that has led to additional surgeries and infections and things because I was not listened to in those moments. So that came to mind as an initial barrier. And then other barriers, the main thing that kind of comes up is that if you're a queer person, especially a queer person navigating maybe transness and recovery, the early days is a lot of administrative work. And for people that don't have bandwidth or have never done that, or who don't have a guidepost or a fairy godmother to kind of guide them through what it looks like to change your name or find a hormone doctor, or those things take a lot of administrative effort. And I'm lucky that I got into peer support and I get to interact with queer folks who are going through those things and help them. But the only reason that I know how to help them is because there was a time when I was kind of chipping away at it, myself. But so admin.
And we'll get to that too. For those peers that think this is just about substance use, not true. Part of that is just walking along someone and being like, here's how you get your name changed. How important that is, because how harmful that can be when you're saying, I'm living with this name that doesn't fit who I am. And so I'm excited to hear a little bit more of the resources and things that were helpful, because I think those are really important too. And I think one of the barriers that we didn't talk about is what our political system looks like, right? Just fear alone, right? We're talking about even when I have the courage to go get help, I'm getting crappy care. I'm getting doctors that don't believe me, or clinicians that don't understand what I'm going through. And so even having the courage sometimes when you have a political system where you look at how a lot of these states vote and you go, wow, 50% of this population would rather see me dead than give me gender affirming care. And it's hard to not feel fearful when you can sit and listen and hear people say those things. And we're blessed to live in a state that actually is doing better than a lot of other states. We're not perfect, but we're doing better than a lot of other states. But as we're looking at this younger generation growing up, lack of access to gender affirming care, especially with our young trans folks, recognizing how that's going to impact mental health as they are starting to transition into young adults. All right. What are good queer affirming resources for SUD, mental health? This one I want you to focus a little bit more on like treatment centers, meetings, peer support, mental health, doctors, places that you know like, hey, these are the places that I've gotten good services, because those are important for people who are working with the queer community to know, send them here because I got good care here.
I mean, I guess I'll go through, I would like to plug where I work. I work at the Twin Cities Wellness Center and Recovery Gym. Serve a wide variety of people, a large swath of the community, but a big portion is LGBT folks, and we are excellent resource. For myself, I've had wonderful interactions with the Family Tree Clinic, with Park Nicollet, with U of M. I'm happy for those places to exist. Also, Vibrant Life Therapy is an excellent mental health resource. If you're looking for specifically queer or BIPOC therapists, I can't recommend them enough.
It sucks. A lot of the places that I would love to recommend from my own experience currently are no fat thing. Pride Institute was such a great resource, and since it's closing, I think there's been a little bit of a gap in residential treatment centers of the trans folks that I've worked with. Some of them have reported having pretty good experiences at Latitudes for inpatient treatment. I also want to say that any resource that we give you, your mileage may vary. Just because there have been some folks that have had good experiences doesn't mean it's going to be that way for everyone. I don't think there's any one size fits all resource. I've had the most holistic recovery, I think, when being in community with queer folks. Specifically meetings. I don't think 12-step programs are for everyone, but the community aspect of it is going to be important, no matter how you choose to get and stay sober. So showing up to queer sober events is always the move.
You both took all the answers. I would say, echoing Clementine, really, the first place I typically work closely with is Family Tree. And, before that, there were numerous other places, definitely Pride Institute, Latitudes. We still send people there. They still come to us at Aliveness to receive services as well. So if a person doesn't have to be someone living with HIV, they still can come to our clinic, to our pharmacy, and we can find ways to navigate and help them get to some supportive place. There's tons of groups that happen at Aliveness, and I think being in the community that we're in, all of us know someone, so we always come up with a collective big resource list that we can sort of just ramble on.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned aliveness. I was going to mention if no one else did, but I've had really positive experiences with health partners. I think that if it wasn't for the social worker that I had who got me on health insurance when I moved to this state, I would not have survived my overdose. I wouldn't have been able to go to inpatient treatment. And I think she's great, and she's the supervisor over there now, so I know she's really working to make sure her staff are good as well. Her name's Courtney. She's amazing. But she did save my life, so I always like to throw that out there. And I received mental health care from Lynn Lake Center for Wellbeing. I think they do a great job. I have a straight clinician who worked at Pride Institute, and he's pretty cool. So I don't know. I think just like going out and experiencing things for yourself. It doesn't always have to be like so queer, but it's also like you may find a good provider in a non like appearing queer space, and I've been lucky to have that. For meetings, there is a 12-step meeting for queer, trans, and friends at All God's Children. I also want to just plug All God's Children. They have a recovery meeting for queer people every single night. And they also have church service for LGBT people. And that can be a really like healing experience for folks. And the pastor there, he was very vocal about he got like handcuffed during this ICE raid stuff. Like he's definitely on our side. So that's been super fun. But yeah, I don't know. There's lots of other resources, but lots of 12-step meetings out there too. That's all I got.
Does anyone have any Minnesota resources?
I would definitely say RAND, if you're familiar with them. They do some great work. I'm trying to think of what else, who else is out
Mayo,
there. Reduction Sisters.
Harm Reduction Sisters. Oh yeah, the question was, are there any greater Minnesota resources for queer people? I'd say the Mayo Clinic does an amazing job. I've been blessed to share a couple cases with them, and they have done a great work, just like acknowledging our queer folk. And yeah, there's the Rural AIDS Action Network, like James mentioned. Yeah, is there any in Duluth? What Duluth resources are there for folks?
Duluth, I know when you're inside of the Harm Reduction Sisters building, they've got a lot of resources. I go up there twice a month to volunteer. I wish I could think of some of the places they've got like Soup Kitchen, they've got some AA meetings, NA meetings, same in St. Cloud. Make my way up there too, so, but I'm typically seeing someone at RAND when I do go up there, so that's it.
Just to build on my answer from earlier, I don't want to plug every university, but certainly there is a lot of good care. I have had luck with gender affirming care at the U of M's Center for Sexual Health. I believe it's now called the Program in Human Sexuality. And I know there is a queer sober resource group in Duluth at UMD.
Yeah, so my day job is actually working in higher education, so I appreciate you saying that because it is, a space with a lot of campuses having resources, and of course a lot of the places have had to rename, and some places have had to shut down, which has been really terrible as well. But certainly on a college level or university level, my background's mostly in small liberal arts colleges in Northfield and here in Twin Cities, so it's something that we work on, but it's also something that I think is important that a lot of times when we have like the Gender and Sexuality Center at Carleton where I was previously, or the Campus Pride Gender Center at Hamlin where I am right now, it's also important to recognize that these centers are also intersecting with counseling and health services as well, and just that's something to be mindful of. Because again, it's entering in one space, but recognizing that our identities cut across different aspects of our lives. And so if you're looking for something on a college or university campus, that's something also I think that's important to recognize is that connection between that queer identified space as well as with the counseling health services, and in addition to any academic programs that some of these institutions might choose to offer as well.
Fantastic. For those in rural areas, if you're looking for a meeting, you can look at intergroup and put in specifically LGBTQ to find a meeting in your area. And universities are a fantastic area where you can find different resources. As for the peers, if you're listening to this, there's not a ton of SUD care and I think even medical that it's scary. that's an amazing intervention to do with the people that you're serving. Is saying, oh, you're getting HRT for the first time. Do you want someone to go to the clinic with you? I can just sit in the lobby, because that can be really anxiety inducing. Or do you want someone to just sit at Social Security with you for a long time because it's really frustrating? And guess what? Causes triggers, right? And so being able to walk alongside folks, and especially knowing that there's so few resources out there that have good care, as a peer, you can walk alongside them through those medical clinics, through some of those other things. All right. As we know, our recovery is much more than just treatment and meetings. People need spaces where they feel safe and accepted. What are some of your go-to resources or places that promote safety, joy, euphoria, however you want to look at it?
It's not necessarily related to recovery, but I do think it produces joy. There's a place where I get my hair cut. It's called the Greenhouse Salon. It's in Bryn Mawr. Greenhouse Salon, Bryn Mawr is what it's called. But it's an amazing space. It's very plant oriented, so if you like plants, but they also just treat you really well. I think I cry every time I get my hair cut there. We just talk about things. So.
Kind of similar. I think it's related to what I was also mentioning earlier. Is just thinking about those other spaces where you have other aspects of your identity, and where you feel like you can bring that part of yourself. If it's part of like the BIPOC community and what that means for you, or if you're coming from, you know, a background that has faith and spirituality as a center of who you are. You know, other places like Prism, I know, is doing a lot of organizing around that area, but also just thinking about recreational spaces. You know, like Stonewall Sports is, you know, one place where I know a lot of folks gravitate towards. They want to be more athletic inclined at different levels. So I think it's important just, again, remember that there are multiple aspects of who you are, and you have to find those spaces where you can, you know, be in community with that aspect of who you are, so that way you're not feeling completely fragmented with everything else.
Any place can be a queer, joyful place if you bring yourself and joy. It helps to have a couple partners in crime. When I am feeling burnt out with work, I really try to connect with nature. I love feeding the birds in Loring Park, and in that neighborhood, you cannot spit without hitting a queer person. Don't spit at queer people, but there is plenty of community to be found there.
Someone moving to Minnesota, I thought Clementine, you would talk about hiking, but Minnesota has the most beautiful lakes, and the water just, for some reason, it's very peaceful, even though I'm not a fan of swimming, and I can swim. But it's amazing, just, you know, being able to go out, and I think as Kaya said, you know, any place, just taking yourself there is great, you know, having your herd, having your group of people that actually do make you feel great. You guys have things in common, so you get to just have a moment to just have fun with the people that you know you vibe with.
I would say any place where you are interested in like giving back. Volunteering really is what helped me in my journey in early recovery. I volunteered with the Aliveness Project, and I do volunteer work now with Narcotics Anonymous, and that's where I find frustration and joy. But it's still really important for me to be in community and with people. And I think volunteering is something that I like to present to some of our patients as they're coming in and like trying to figure out what they want to do with their life and how they want to build income, but they want to test things out. And so, you know, we see it a lot where there will be people who will engage and they go find a volunteer opportunity and then that becomes their job. I think that is just something that like people in early recovery, they, you know, maybe they're in an IOP program, maybe they're, you know, they have support. They don't always have support, but maybe they do, and maybe they have a chance to go volunteer and like build a future. I'd also say higher education or any education or community ed, those are also spaces that you can show up and hopefully be gay. But if you find a good gay one, I found a good little gay cohort with my folks, and that's been really nice. But that's been a space for me.
Yeah, I think oftentimes as peers, we think about the substance use and the mental health, but those other resources are so important. You know, we have to be able to enjoy life. And actually, I'm so grateful that you talked about hair, because I think oftentimes when we're struggling with mental health and substance use, we're not feeling good on the inside, we then aren't able to feel good on the outside, and that's really important. And especially for folks that are struggling with internalized homophobia or transphobia, not feeling like they can actually dress the way that would make them feel good. And so being able to have someone that empowers them, that it may not even be a place, but it's walking along someone and saying, yeah, let's try that. Let's try that shirt on for the first time, or let's try that dress on for the first time. You look fantastic. Getting your hair done or your nails done or whatever it is, to be able to have that affirming and feel good. Or be friends with Whitney, because Whitney will teach you how to dress. You know, and sports, you know, so oftentimes queer folks never felt comfortable playing sports. And so being able to have, you know, a queer space, you know, shout out to Solcana, where it's a queer gym where trans folks can be together and work out together and not have to worry about what they look like and be able to feel supported. And so being able to find those spaces, they're all going to be different, you know, what's exciting for one person, it might be art, and sports for another person, and figuring out what resources works for that person that brings joy to their life, because that's really important with recovery.
Sam?
Yep.
We had a question from the chat that's relevant. Glasses. Wondering if there was an app, site, or resource, or how they might have a list of how to support queer community businesses and things like what you were talking about, like that gym or other places that would support. Is there a place they can find that?
So the question was, is there a place where they can find queer organizations that places can support?
Yes, I definitely have a bookmark, but I don't know. But there's like a directory.
The answer was yes, but they don't know how to find it. There is an organization similar to like what Marco does, but for queer organization, but I don't know.
I believe both PFLAG and NAMI Minnesota have directories of LGBT resources. I don't know if it's super thoroughly vetted, but it is a starting point for you to explore more.
I cannot give you the name. I was looking at this app online, and it was an app where people were queer, and they actually would be like, I'm interested in cooking, and the group went out to cooking, but I don't remember the name of it. It popped up while I was playing a video game. I thought, oh my God, I should download this app, and I probably will go back to that.
Everywhere is queer. Oh my god, that's great.
Everywhere is queer, says Whitney. That's the app. Yeah. I haven't heard that one yet.
Yes.
So I know there's somebody, one of our colleagues at Aliveness, Piper, who was part of making the trans resource guide. She made a very, very robust resource guide. So we'll be sure to share that back with folks. It's amazing. It's like 100 million pages long, and it's up to date, and a lot of folks spent a lot of time working on it together. I know, I just know that, but that's the one you were thinking of? Awesome. Yeah, we'll make sure that y'all have it.
How might substance use look different in the community, in the queer community?
Campfires. That was my experience with the first time I went to the Pride Institute as a client was like a long time ago. But I came in kind of not having been ingratiated in the queer community at all. Had been living in California and then Arizona after that. And when I came to Pride, it was my first time being around queers specifically, but then also queers that had dabbled in substances, and it was that was it. That was the topic of conversation, especially at that period of time, because there was a lot more. it was the 2010s and it was a lot more gay men. I mean, not, but it was it was my introduction to what that meant, and then that, you know, my personal lived experience sent me down that path as well. For so many of us, I think, for different reasons, substances and sex are just so tied, whether it's because it gives you bravery, whether it's because you're in a bar and that's the only place you know how to meet people. I think a huge conversation that needs to be had with people who are queer and in recovery is, what is your relationship to sex and substances at the same time? And that's why culturally responsive or specific, if you're lucky, care is so important, because in a room full of people who don't identify the same as you or under the same umbrella as you, we don't feel comfortable talking about those things because it wasn't comfortable in school to talk about those things. It wasn't comfortable at Thanksgiving to talk about those things, so why would it be around these folks? And that was really kind of the most amazing thing about Pride, was that it wasn't shameful in any way. It was, okay, if this is what you're using this for, how do you still do this thing that's going to be a big part of your life without needing the substance to get through it?
That's excellent. I think that's unfortunately been a large part of, I think, the way the queer community has been constructed in this country and in a lot of Western societies is having substances be a part of our gathering spaces. And it's also been more significant because it's commercialized, right? So we think about all the brands that are out there that are throwing the rainbow flag in their color schemes in June, and how that's showing up in all of our Pride events, and how those corporations are showing up as featured sponsors for concerts, and they're giving away free samples, and so that just it's become pervasive across the culture. And I think it's something where, because it has been a large part of the socialization experience, and in part because it does, as you mentioned, reduce barriers in terms of, well, I'm in this space, I don't know people, I'm uncomfortable, I might not feel attractive, but everyone else is doing it, and it's what helps me feel like I'm a part of this space, or what's allowing me to be engaged. It is that easy gateway to engage in further activity, and it's role modeled. And it's something that we're a part of, and it's something that is not very often discussed when we're thinking about what do we want our community to look like, and how are things that have been part of the community for a long time unintentionally created harm, and what do we do about that?
Just speaking from my own experience, so much of my drug and alcohol use was really driven by this desire to get out of myself, get out of my body, and just dissociate. And a lot of that was because I was not getting gender affirming care at the time. I think for a lot of trans people in particular, just going through the process of a transition, whether it's just socially or medically too, can be really helpful for your long-term recovery, and to something that's kind of unique to the queer community's recovery experience.
I was just gonna pass it to you. I was thinking, one of the things it does do is, substance gives you that acceptance. So you can be in a place where you don't feel welcome, but if you got something, you just, people are on you. So all of a sudden you're that person, and it does sort of link us together, chemicals, also mental health at the same time. For our community, a person could be dealing with all the things from their past, and now you're just trying to fix that, numb that void, feel better about yourself. And it does, we've all heard liquid courage. So you drink, you feel great, you can go out, you can say whatever you want, you're lively at the party. So I've watched it, I've been there with family, friends, partners, mom. That's what got me in this work.
Yeah, I think just so much of queer identity can be tied into substance use, but it doesn't have to be. And I think, Whitney really valued creating new spaces for folks and do sober spaces for folks. And it's hard because so many queer people have had to do survival sex work, which can be tied into drug use and use that. And we see that a lot with a lot of our patients at Aliveness, not even just the queer ones. And I think all those things are really tough and not not an easy topic and not something that is often spoken about publicly. And yeah, I think that everybody said a lot of really good points. I'm really glad you were brave enough to bring up chemsex. Never a fun topic, but it's very much ingrained into so much of what many queer people experience. And yeah, I don't have much else.
If she didn't bring it up, it was gonna be one of the questions to make sure we talked about it, because it is important to talk about, so I appreciate it. For those that don't understand, chemsex is taking substances for different reasons, so maybe I'm involved in sex work and I need to dissociate, and I need to not be present for my own safety. Sometimes it's to kind of loosen up your body a little bit, and so making sure that if I'm not using substances, I'm using a lot more lube, because so you're not hurting yourself. And so there's just pieces. But the biggest component is being able to then connect to a relationship and be able to have sex without. There's also hypersexuality. You know, when you're using methamphetamines, it can make you feel very good and sexual. And so being able to figure out, how do I get those feelings when I'm not using methamphetamines? And so being able to approach that in a very non-judgmental way, where I feel like that's really important as clinicians, where these panelists obviously are educated and understand. But I remember the first time I did a training on chemsex, the crowd went, what? And they're all LADCs, you know? And so being able to say, if you're approaching that conversation in an uncomfortable way, your clients aren't going to want to talk to you at all, because that's not going to feel safe.
I want to add on to that because I think it compounds the exclusion and it compounds the marginalization if we're not entering into spaces where we're recognizing that these different experiences we have from a marginalized point of view and the things that we use to help with coping and navigating, and if we're sharing that and it's automatically being judged, because that's just compounding the stigma that someone's already experiencing. And I think it is what makes it hard, not just for a queer community, but that anytime you have intersections of identity that are marginalized, we all are living in social systems that we make choices, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes socialized, that allow us to navigate that in a way that feels good in the moment. And when you are in a space where you're role modeling that and seeing that, but you are trying to acknowledge, okay, maybe this isn't the best choice for me. And the first response you get is criticism or judgment because of the choices you've made that have been very much in context of the community that you're in and in context of the identities that you're presenting. That doesn't make it any better. It doesn't make it a space where people can feel like I can really truly be vulnerable with the different parts of myself in order to get to a place that I could be. So I think it's really important to just recognize that, you know, that non-judgmental piece, especially if we don't relate to it personally. And it may not have been our lived experience, but it's someone else's lived experience and it's part of a context of our lives. And so we have to recognize that it's not just an individual piece, it's also a collective piece, and we have to enter those conversations knowing that we're coming in with baggage. But how do we present it in a way where our baggage is not making it harder for someone else to address what they feel like they need to come in with?
What are some harm reduction interventions that you share with people that you're working with or friends with?
I was just having a wonderful conversation with one of our new social workers who she has not got a lot of experience in harm reduction, and she was kind of like feeling it out, and she was like, oh my god, you guys this is so different from what I'm used to doing. But it was a really deep conversation, and I felt like it was really good. I feel like self-direction and autonomy are kind of like at the center of harm reduction, and affirming folks' choices that they are making, and then providing space for folks, if perhaps maybe they're not able to, go and graduate from a treatment center, yet I'm still going to be there for you. We practice harm reduction in all of what we do at Aliveness. It is sewn very deep into the fabric of our practice, and sometimes it is not, sometimes it results in somebody overdosing and passing, and other times it allows folks to make choices about their care in a way that feels safe, and they are able to move on and then build trust with the provider in a way that maybe they haven't been able to make in a treatment setting where that's not being taught, that's not being practiced. And so I'm a sober person who works in harm reduction, and it's very it's like an oxymoron in a way, and yet I don't bring my lived experience of sobriety and throw everybody's got to go to Pride, because that's not going to work. That's just not going to work for every patient, and unfortunately, fortunately we're all different, and that's the beauty of it. And I just say harm reduction is just continuing to show up for people, affirming their truth, holding space for them, and understanding that everybody's journeys are not linear, and we're all going to be different and experience care in a different way. And yeah, just continue to show up for people who are using. Love people who are using drugs, because many of us, I used to use drugs, and if people didn't love me, I wouldn't have made it. And if it wasn't non-judgmental, I wouldn't have made it. So that's my message about harm reduction.
I would say for me, when I'm talking with a client or a family member, just because mom stopped cold turkey doesn't mean you're going to stop cold turkey. So we go to treatment, and treatment doesn't always talk about harm reduction. It's about stopping. How do we stop you in 8 days, 16 days, 30 days? But harm reduction gives you the ability to be able to, maybe you did it 4 times this week, and we're like, next week, can we try maybe 2? Or maybe today we go 1 time doing it. But it's not forcing a person to stop today, and also educating them on all things that we do are harm reduction. I was talking to someone about it, and I was like, every time you put on your seatbelt in the car, you're practicing harm reduction. You don't clip that seatbelt, you might get ejected out of the car. So we don't try not to judge people, and you also meet them where they are. So you're not putting whatever you think, how you think they should act or how you think they should be, because they're not doing it the way you want them to do it. But it's their own journey, so just allowing them to get through it. And also, as Nick said, showing up for people, always being there. I don't turn my back on them no matter if they go back and use again. I would love to say what I call it, but I'm not going to call it that. So I'll just, in my other space, we call it an F it moment. You just really, you just have one of those moments, no different than driving down the road here in Minnesota and hitting a pothole. You will hit another one. But you still keep going. You still keep doing it. So when it happens, pick yourself up, keep going.
Yeah, in a lot of recovery spaces, there's this emphasis on sobriety time. And it's like if you have a relapse, there's this shame that comes with it. I really like what you both said about letting people make their own decisions. Radical autonomy is the only way that people are going to choose something healthier for themselves. I know back in my downtown Julie Brown days, nobody could tell me anything. And it wasn't until I reached that conclusion myself where I said I need recovery that it actually clicked for me. And to your point, James, harm reduction can look a lot of different ways, whether it's cutting back on the amount of times you're using, but also just changing your methods of use. If you are using needles, making sure that you have clean needles and ways of disposing them, changing ingestion methods from using needles to smoking can be helpful. There's a lot of different harm recovery or harm reduction options. Have somebody that you is like your using buddy. I don't know if you want to use that terminology, but tell them that you're using. So
I think in my experience working in higher education and student affairs and helping professions, it's first of all, it's just really centering the person and just reminding yourself and reminding them that they're a person at the core, and the way they're handling their life is not something that is completely in isolation, and that it's important to recognize that there are a lot of factors that have contributed to the decisions they've made or felt like they've had to make, and remembering that they're still a person regardless of whatever label we put on them. If we're labeling someone as a user, or if we're using someone as a sex worker, those words matter, and it takes away that person's ability to be recognized as a person and seen. And I think that's one of the things we talked a lot about in terms of my career, is just remembering that in these tough moments, we still have to recognize that core piece of who that person is. I think the other component is also for those of us who are in roles that have been in helping professions, it's owning our shit. And being able to talk about when we're bringing our stuff into the ways we're engaging in interventions and in the ways we think we're trying to be helpful. And that we are having honest conversations about the behavior we're concerned about and not projecting it on them as a person as well. And I think there are lots of times where I've been in spaces in my student affairs background where it's like, we're student affairs, we know things. I'm like, you still got your crap you're bringing into it, and that's causing harm. And we need to be able to talk about that, because your unintended thing is actually creating greater harm for that individual, but also for the community you're trying to help. So we have to also make sure we're creating spaces where we can sit and talk about what we're uncomfortable with, what we don't have exposure to. I had a friend who was engaged in sex work for a long time, and I had to have a conversation about understanding that, because I was saying things unintentionally that I thought were interesting and funny because that's what I had heard, but not understanding all the dynamics in terms of a choice that they made in the life you're in created unnecessary friction that didn't need to be there. And it's because I was bringing my baggage into it, and I wasn't in a space where someone was asking me or inviting me to be part of that conversation. So I think that's also another component, is recognizing our own stuff can get in the way, and how do we invite others to, who are trying to be helpful, to be able to work through that, because that's also harm reduction. It's us making sure that our unintended stuff is not creating greater harm and making things worse.
I think of harm reduction in terms of increasing quality and length of life. So whatever is going to make your life better and hopefully a lot longer. People have said switching the modality. I love that you said it happens in every part of your life, because I think that's so true. I've had conversations with my mom who doesn't use drugs about her spending. It's all the ways that you you adjust your behavior instead of expect to cease behavior completely. For so long, when I got into recovery for years, I struggled with the emphasis on clean time, and then you would have a lapse, and then suddenly you're back at zero. And then what felt to me like a change in how I was perceived by people. Like, not only was I dealing with whatever I was feeling inside, but it felt like other people had shifted their thoughts of me too. And so that kind of strict restraint, I'm someone who can't do drugs, but changing my mindset about the way that I navigated not doing drugs, and not putting so much pressure on the act of stopping and the length of time that I got. That was my version of harm reduction, was changing the way that the blueprint was for me, because I tried it for 10 years and it didn't work for me. It wasn't until I adjusted it, and I think people have this thought that harm reduction is like a license to just use, a license to just keep using, and there might be substances involved in the way that some people interact with harm reduction, but that's such a limited view of what it means for people. If it was easy for people to just quit, then everyone would do that, We want people to be alive and here on the planet, and I would much rather have someone maybe using medical cannabis or, I would much rather have a client come to me fucked up and alive than I would, have them be gone from the world. Sorry for swearing. Sorry.
And access to Narcan. So making sure that people have access, you can get it for free. There's lots of places that will provide that. It's about keeping people alive so that then they can find their own version of recovery, right? And also, if folks are deciding, hey, I want to do a couple lines at the club of Coke, great. Are you willing to do test strips to make sure that what you're doing is Coke? And some people will say, yeah, because if I don't have a tolerance for fentanyl, and I do a line of fentanyl, it can kill me. And so being able to put in things that are going to protect them, and understanding that recovery isn't going to look the same to you as it is to the person that you're friends with. All right. What can allies, providers, or policymakers do to help the community? What changes need to be made?
I would say for an ally, continue showing up. When it comes to policies, I think across the board, we're hearing this today. Funding is an issue. So if you think back to, working at Pride Institute, we took pride in saying we were an exclusive LGBTQ community throughout the 50 states. I'm like, that sounds crazy today to realize that there was no other place that did this. So one place should not be the place to save all, queer people. But funding was an issue there. Also, just not having the funding. Also, if you think about peer support, a lot of those individuals are not reimbursed. So really, just the policies being changed to make people be able to afford, or as you said earlier, there's a lot of free things that are out there. It'd be great if those services were free, but they're not. They do cost. And so it makes it hard for a person to even get into treatment if you're already telling them it's going to cost something and they're trying to figure out how to pay for it when they don't have a place to live or they don't have the means to get to a place. So the last thing I want to do is spend thousands of dollars to go to treatment when I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight, or I don't know how I'm going to pay my, bills. People are still thinking about those things. They don't just kick them to the wind and say, oh, screw it. They're like, it's still attached to their name. So many things are attached to funding.
Yeah, I have a friend who was a CPRS and she was not able to work last year because of all this suspected fraud, and her company wasn't even committing fraud, but whatever they were using to pay her was shut down. Her whole company, she had to move jobs twice. And so I look at that as that's a policy failure. And there's ways that we can continue to advocate for more robust resources, but Minnesota has been on kind of the spotlight for policy, for healthcare, and fraud, waste, and abuse accusations, right? But Minnesota could do a better job at letting less people start a business, and maybe working with trusted providers to initiate programs. I hate to say that, but that's where we kind of got into the situation that we were in. I know there was a lot of really good people doing the work, but I live next to people who were operating a program that, and they don't have jobs anymore, right? I just moved in and they were operating a housing stabilization services program. That program was shut down last year by the state, and so we're now seeing less services being offered to folks because of policy decisions. And I'm not going to sit here and blame an individual because it's not an individual; it's a whole system that needs to be reevaluated. I know that they're currently taking a lot of services away from counties and bringing it to the state. That's like their way to like solve it, or that's their attempt to solve it. And I really do hope that streamlining of services can help, because there are so many amazing services and peer support. You know, we were talking about it in our quality management group today. It's like that's something that we kind of do at Aliveness, but it's something that like we could expand upon. But I was looking at the funding mechanism. I was at a conference a few weeks ago, and the funding mechanism that was used in Wisconsin for an amazing peer support program was a program that was shut down in our state. So it's like, how are we going to get back to where we were? What choices are our leaders going to do stay? And they're not going to know what to do. So how are we going to organize and give them that information in a way that's succinct, that makes sense, but also uplifts these programs for these folks? And those are the recommendations we need to be making. So if you're in peer work, you need to go to events like this and talk about the importance of peer work. You need to call your legislator, you need to show up for Days on the Hill. That is a super important skill, and it's something very scary for me. I went to my first one this last year, but I think more providers need to be in that space, and more people with lived experience need to be in that space, and more people who are experiencing services and experiencing the loss of services need to be talking to legislators about what they lost, because that's the way that they will ingrain in their mind.
I think when it comes to policy, we have to remember that it's not an either or situation. I think a lot of times when we think about politics, we think about political candidates, it's either your candidate is capable of doing this, and that's it, and you make your whole decision based on that. And we do have political parties as well, for better or for worse. And so I think it's important to recognize that. One of my professional mentors told me earlier in my career, especially when it comes to working at colleges and universities, that every organization has this dysfunction. You have to learn how to choose which dysfunction you want to live with. And that really, I think, also applies not just to organizations, but certainly to policymakers and to our politics. We, from an HRC perspective, HRC, decides which candidates HRC is going to formally endorse, and as a Minnesota Steering Committee, we're supporting that. We don't necessarily think that every one of our candidates that HRC endorses nationally is going to be the best at everything. And we recognize that there are candidates that HRC has endorsed that I will tell you, as a steering committee, we have concerns with, because they may not think, we have not as individuals thought that'd be the best thing for Minnesota, as lived on the ground experience here and how policies are working and how that may affect at the federal level. So it's important to recognize that we aren't minimizing things to those either or situations, while at the same time recognizing that we need to move more toward that both and perspective, that both the critique of it can exist and that we should continue to critique it. That our ability to critique our lived experience and the systems that support us does not mean we don't like or love our communities or our country. We do that because of that. And that it is that responsibility to do that. And we have to make sure we're giving people options to engage in ways that are meaningful for them, where they are in that moment. I love that you commented about the importance of going and lobbying and calling your legislature. When we do a lot of that advocacy work with HRC, we also know that's not everyone's cup of tea, right? And so we have to think about, are there other ways to make sure that we are having those voices presented and honored authentically if those folks can't be in that room because they can't go to a lobby day because they have an hourly job and they can't take the time off. So how do we still create spaces for those voices to still be engaged? And we have to create opportunities for people to engage in ways that feel like they can and can do it in a space that allows them to feel that level of safety before they are right now. Particularly this spring when we had all of the No Kings rallies. Everyone was like, you have to go to No Kings. I'm like, girl, I'm a brown person. I immigrated to this country. I was walking with my U.S. passport, just like the mayor of St. Paul. Do I need to show up at No Kings and be more of a target? No. So what are my other options, and how am I helping make sure that people who have those identities or have other experiences know that they can still be a part of it? We're not reducing it to an either you're at the rally or you're not, because that's not the situation. It's the both and. Like, you can both be angry and you can have options to engage in ways that are meaningful for you, that protect who you are and your safety at a level that allows you to be engaged where you're at now. And hopefully that can create the opportunity where, if you have the ability to go to a lobby day, that first one's gonna be scary. That second one hopefully is less. And you can invite someone to be a part of that next time once you've got your own bearings in place too.
For allies on an interpersonal level, I think there's commonly this pitfall where we think we have learned everything that we need to when it comes to allyship. And we have all the right perspectives, and that's the extent of our work. And to those allies, I would say never lose curiosity and humility. Be willing to fuck up and listen and learn. That is the best way you can show up for the people in your life, is just by remaining curious about their experience and being willing to walk through those uncomfortable moments, because we're all human. And if you want to be a good ally, you're always going to want to strive for better.
Yeah, I think, obviously I loved the Pride Institute. I was there as a client many times. I worked there. It felt like a safe womb for me. But I think closing can have a really maybe beautiful effect, which is that the rest of the community of providers is having conversations around how can we do better for this population. In that way, I think, providers in general need to hire queer and trans people. I don't think that that's a hard thing to do. There's plenty, I would say, so many qualified and amazingly talented clinicians, peers, administrative professionals, have them in client-facing roles, and that's going to be huge for allies. I think, hire queer and trans people, donate where you can, go to things like this where you can engage with the queer community. You don't have to be like my mom and have 4 10 feet tall pride flags in your front lawn in a small town, but any way that you can engage with the community directly. And for policymakers, I think it's just money. We need a lot of money for things. It doesn't happen unless there's money in the pockets. Amazing organizations like Aliveness need to have funding, and that funding doesn't need to be interrupted all the time by I would say kind of a paranoid thought of where those taxpayer dollars are going. Never mind the other places it's going. We won't talk about that today. So,
And not to put you on the spot, but did you want to talk about how we can make change for policy, and what you'd like to see as far as how we can make some change?
And I just want to thank Representative Frederick for being here, who represents the Mankato area and is on the House Human Services and Finance Committee, and has been a big champion, one of the representatives who really understands peer recovery support services and has stood by that over these past few sessions. So we're going to put you on the spot.
Thank you. I just want to say first, thank you all for coming up and taking notes in the back. You should not stand in front of a speaker. About what you're saying, and there's a lot of really good points that I really, really like. Just like putting a flag up doesn't actually make it an inclusive space, and I think that that's so true. And it made me think about some of the things that I have experienced within the DFL House caucus, and what we've seen. So, but the most recent point about like who to advocate, how to advocate, encouraging people to come up, right? When you were speaking, I was leaning up to Wendy and be like, that. Because one of the things that I hear so often, and this comes from kids to adults, is that they don't think that they matter. They don't think that their story has power. And so one of the things I want to say, and I can never say it enough, and so I'm going to say it again, you have power. You are a powerful person. Your story has power. I cannot tell you the number of times that people have come before the legislature, whether they were, I think, middle school up to full-blown adults, where they were vulnerable. They shared their story. I think one of the most impactful things that I will remember was actually my very first term in the legislature was a group of juniors in high school who were advocating for access to mental health supports, and there was a young girl that shared a story, and she said she had to read it because her friend is no longer here to be able to share her story, so they wanted to advocate for that. And their willingness to come and testify and share their story moved that entire legislative committee to tears and had a unanimous vote in support of that. And so I've seen that happen more often than I can count, where people, if you're willing to come up and share your story, it has power. It actually can change people's votes, where I've seen people who I may not always agree with politically have told me afterwards, I was going to be voting against that, but I heard that story and we have to do something about it, and they changed their vote in the moment because they had someone who was willing to share their lived experience. So there's so much power to that. So hopefully your first day on the Hill turns into your 50th day in the Hill, or I mean, that's a lot, but and just that you just keep coming, because there's so much value in that. So thank you for everybody. So yeah, I don't know. I can't emphasize the impact that lived stories have in our politics. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, can I get
So yes, stories have power, but I want to augment what Clementine's saying. Money matters in politics. Let's be honest about that, right? Our campaigns are driven by fun, and as a fundraiser, I do this for a living, and what I do with HRC is fundraising. And so we have to remember that that is a driver, but we also have to remember that every dollar matters. You know, we spend a lot of time thinking that it's only the mega gifts that make a difference. It's not. Small gifts also matter. And especially when you feel like, okay, maybe my $5 doesn't matter. Well, I can tell you, like on today, which is National Give Out Day, we were giving to LGBTQ+ organizations. Every organization I got an email from had a match to it. So you might not have $100 or you might have $20, but your $10 can have the effect of that 20 because somebody else who, for a lot of different reasons we may not know about, are in a position to help amplify your voice. So I want us to remember that, yes, our stories matter, but we have to make sure that the organizations that are doing this, the people who we are putting in office, also have the resources to do that and continue doing that, and every dollar really does matter, and we can't believe that every contribution is going to be insignificant, especially when there are opportunities, when there are matches, and they're not always 1-to-1 matches. They could be 2-to-1, or I saw 3-to-1 matches. You know, that's a way to help amplify your voice too.
Thank you. All right, we are almost at time, so I want to open it up if there are questions for people virtually, people in person. Yeah.
I have a virtual question. What could a person do if they work in an organization that is supposed to be inclusive of all, but they know of another coworker that does not have that personal belief? How do you speak out as an ally for people? Like when people are very vocal about not having that belief?
So what would you do if you were a person that worked at a place that said that they were inclusive, but there are coworkers that are obviously verbally stating that they are not in agreement?
The power of the pack. We sometimes will address it. Sometimes it's not their verbal. I think that's kind of something that I want to just state. Sometimes it's through action. sometimes people will be saying, especially in Minnesota, they'll be saying all the right things to get the job, to do the thing, but maybe their actions aren't showing that. So calling people in, not embarrassing them though, I think that only creates division. But take somebody into your office and just say, hey, like, I'm noticing when you do this, it doesn't necessarily reflect our core mission and values. Can you talk to me about why? And people, they'll say all the things that you want to hear back. They'll be like super embarrassed, but I think just like trying to like identify when a behavior maybe is not aligning with our values, and then just trying to have a conversation and see where that person's at, and then just document, right? Like keep a little list going. That'd be my recommendation.
Oh, I was only going to say, really getting to find out what brought that person to the organization or to the company, like asking questions, like when they apply, maybe a best friend told them it's a great place to work and no one told them the rest of it. Like when people come to work for Aliveness, they're like, are you really working with people that have HIV or AIDS? Yes. It doesn't rub off. So I do have those same conversations, and you just try to educate people and let them know that, everybody has a job and a purpose, something for us to do here. So maybe this isn't their place that they want to be in, or maybe the position they're currently in is not the position that they're great at. So you get to find out there's something else that they're great at, and they might all of a sudden do that and fall in love with the organization. But I definitely would go ahead and Nick said, document. If it's not written down, it didn't happen.
It definitely comes down to bandwidth. And so if you are an ally that has the capacity for these conversations, absolutely have those conversations. But I would say having curiosity is always going to be beneficial. Whenever I find myself interacting with a transphobe, I recognize that that is their own shit, that is not mine, and I am really curious as to how they arrived at their conclusions, and just talking with them through that, and not trying to bring my own judgments into it, I think has been more effective for me to navigate conversations with people that aren't really aligned or don't really see me as a person.
I want to echo the piece about that curiosity and how you handle that on an individual level is important, and recognizing that your own capacity matters too with that, because there can be situations where you just don't have the capacity to address it, and sometimes that just has to be okay with it, and I don't think it's fair to think that it's up to you and only you to resolve a situation. But I think it's important to recognize your own personal role in it, and thinking about the systems that we're operating in. So there's definitely the individual piece, that one-on-one, the call-in piece is certainly a wonderful way of thinking about it and engaging people in that conversation and being curious and asking questions, while also thinking about what is your role in the context of your organization. As someone who's been in managerial roles in higher education, I might have dynamics that I have to be mindful of as a supervisor in terms of my team. And while my own personal beliefs might be like, yeah, that's super effed up, I also might have some constraints that I have to navigate with myself in order to figure out how to deal with it. That I also have to deal with my own individual capacity and thinking about, okay, how much am I going to put at risk of myself because of my identities and my role in this? While at the same time, it's also thinking that upper level is that organizational context, is that what can you do at that broader systems level when you're thinking about, documenting things, and how that in conversation may be consistent or inconsistent with an organization's mission, vision, or values, and how that might play out. So I think it's important to recognize that all three of those levels, that individual, that group, and role, and that organization, are all happening at the same time. And you have to be mindful of what do you have the ability to influence? How much are you willing to put at risk for yourself to do that? What is your capacity? And thinking about where that intersects with the appropriate level.
I think of behaviors and beliefs. So you can have a zero tolerance policy for behaviors, but unfortunately, as much as we might not like it, we have to have space for people to be able to have their own beliefs, even if they are different than ours and don't align with our values. I think so much of kind of why we're in the situation we're in as a country is because we stopped allowing people to have beliefs that differed from ours, and that made them really angry. And you know, in my work, we talk about needing to comply with the rules of engagement. And when you're in a setting like an organization where you work, where you have stated that you are inclusive, you're allowed to have zero tolerance policies for behaviors that do not align with that. But as far as, you know, if that's just that they're a person that holds a different belief than you and they haven't made an action, I think, you know, like you said, just maintaining that curiosity, and hopefully you can sway the belief in the way that is more loving.
And sometimes not even swaying. Microaggressions sometimes happen unintentionally, and whether that's race, gender, sexuality, and it's exhausting for the other person that's experiencing that. And being able, if we don't open up curiosity, people aren't going to have those conversations. But again, as the person experiencing the microaggression, you may not have capacity to have those. And sometimes that's when you ask for allies to step up, because, you know, if I'm correcting, no, he, they, it gets exhausting, and sometimes you may not have that. Where an ally, my coworker is the best, is like, no, he. And being able to correct that immediately does not matter if you're the CEO of the company. It's being able to have those conversations where people go, oh, shit. And being able to check themselves. And there's obviously a difference between intentional discrimination versus something that I'm going, oh, I need to think about that. But if we don't have curiosity and we don't open that door, people aren't going to have that. But sometimes when you've been hurt enough, you don't really have that ability to do that. Any other questions? I want to thank the panel. You guys were all amazing and vulnerable. So yes, please.
I have a question. Okay, we kicked off Pride Month. So now for the folks in the recovery community, what's the best way to navigate this month?
Sure.
And
Good question.
yeah, sample water.
Whit said, we have officially kicked off Pride Month. And with that, what advice do you all have to say? How do we stay above water and navigate that? She said a lot cooler.
I'm just gonna say stay united with the people that are, I keep saying your people, but just stay connected. You know where to go. We also know those allies, those partners, those families that do support us this month. Go to those places, go to those people. Don't go where you don't belong. Somebody don't want your money or don't want you, don't give them your money. But all I can say is, and stay true to yourself for the month. You know, it's not necessarily just a Pride Month. We get to be ourselves the entire year, every single day. But this one month, we do sort of sprinkle a little bit more glitter on everything and have fun. So, have a great time.
There is an event that I just want to plug. It is the Queer Jam. It is a speaker jam for Narcotics Anonymous. The Saturday night of Pride. It's put on by my home group at the Bryn Mawr Presbyterian Church, but there will be some queer speakers, trans speakers, but it's a safe space for folks to come if they're maybe not doing well at the park and they're having a hard time connecting. And so that's going to be from like 5:30 to 9 p.m. at Bryn Mawr Presbyterian Church outside. It's a free event. We'll have food, and we've been raising money for it. So it'd be great if some queer folks could show up, especially some new folks who maybe don't know what to do during Pride and are worried about what, you know, might happen. So that's my little plug.
You do not have to do Pride the same way you did Pride when you were using. I know of some very crafty queers that love to get super turned on yarn. So find a group and stick to it. And if you are having difficulty finding a group, because I think that is something that we've talked about, find your people and stick to them. They're out there. I think something that was so helpful for me in making connections was to recognize that everyone is just as neurotic and emotionally raw as me in the recovery space. And if I go into interactions, just, willing to be messy, willing to be imperfect, it can be disarming and it can help other people feel like they have the space to be messy and imperfect. So I guess what I'm trying to say is shoot your shot. Just go up to people and say, hi, I'm a weirdo and I want to be weirdos together.
So for plugging events, HRC is hosting an event on Wednesday at a convention center. It's called the State of Equality. So it's an opportunity for us to kind of hear about what's happened in the most recent legislative session as it relates to LGBTQ issues. And so it's an opportunity to kind of hear from some elected officials, but also to really be engaged in that conversation. And it's a space where it's smaller, more intimate than going to a lobby day, for example, which tends to be really heavy. So that can be a space where you can be able to share your story and be able to have some place to vocalize that and be a part of that community. We also will have food and beverages there as well. So free event on Wednesday at the convention center at 6 o'clock.
Wear sunscreen.
Just remember, no matter whether you're a gay male, you're trans, lesbian, I don't care what LGBTQIA two-spirit, you matter. And whether it's June, July, August, every month, whether you slip up, you're sober, you're engaging in harm reduction, you matter. You're an amazing human being just the way that you are. And so keeping your head above water is just be you and love who you are. And if you're not in that capacity yet, find someone to love you. Find that person that's willing to walk alongside you until you're ready to love yourself. Because that's really important.
Oh, you did, okay.
There we go. All right. Let's if you're wanting CEUs for tonight, we do have a QR code over there with the survey to take, and I think we're making that available online as well. And one last shout out for whether you're a peer or a policymaker. I hope this was a great conversation for everyone, and it's a great way to kick off Pride Month. We have a lot of work to do in a lot of spaces, and round of applause again for our panel and for Sam. Thank you so much.
I know.
Oh, yes.
So
Geraldine was gonna come tonight. Somebody
wearing a shirt that I like. We're on the same team.
Insane. It was
Yeah, absolutely. I'm saying it's village, it's not even one of us. I always see it.
Sam, we're gonna stick you in this picture too, Rick. That will go too. I'll take it. You want? I can take it. You can take it also. You can take a picture also. Okay. I'm happy to. Well, how do we find it from you? Marco is. Let me put wide angle like this.
Here, guys, everything that provides is perfect, so thank you.
Take a picture.
With us.
I mean, I could be a artist, but I feel like it's more
Up here. When invite you to
You do it.
Wait, me too. Oh, good luck, Brian. Oh, nice. Oh, so sorry.
there.
Sad.
3, 2, 1, recovery.
Recovery.
Sad.
Alright, one more. Everybody did it down? Just kidding.
Awesome.
Yes.